In thus looking squarely in the face of the world today, we see God being driven out of it to deify man. Half the world is drawing an iron curtain around itself to shut God out and exalt a monster in his place, to dehumanize and enslave man. We see degradation, corruption, greed, fear, lust for power, and atheism engulfing half the world, and the tortures of the Russian Inquisition far exceeding the tortures of the Middle Age Spanish Inquisition as the fruits of today's world thinking. We see peace, happiness, security, and freedom going out of the world and war engulfing it to enslave and degrade man. We see beauty and culture being driven out of the world, and the spiritual rhythms of the fine arts lost in the sea of ugliness which is debasing the culture of the race. We see genius being driven from the face of the earth for want of recognition and the patronage which alone will nourish it to survival. We see the swing of the cosmic pendulum away from the glory of the 7 Renaissance centuries to another decadent age of forgetfulness of all that is good in man. What of tomorrow? Yes, what of tomorrow? We of today are fast using up the resources which have taken the earth millions of years to store up for man's use. The coal, oil, nitrates, and minerals which mankind has taken from the ground in 100 years have made big inroads into its total deposits. Let us assume that we have 5 centuries of supply, or even 10 centuries. Man will live on this planet for millions of years before it spirals out beyond Mars's orbit where human life will cease. What of them? Are we despoiling the earth for our children of the far tomorrow? Are we emptying its bins for them? Are we proliferating, robbing even the fertility of our soil, and losing it into the sea by robbing the mountainsides of their forest? The greed and ignorance of a few generations of today can wipe the human race from the face of the earth for long eons by sheer wastefulness of earth's resources. It would take millions of years for nature to restore balance by bringing continents with new resources above the seas and taking old and worn-out continents under her seas for regeneration. Why are we here? The sole purpose of man on earth is to manifest his Creator. He has no other purpose. The sole desire of man on earth is to find peace and happiness. The only way that man can find peace and happiness is to discover his unity with his Creator. The greatest miracle which can happen to any man is the discovery of his self and his oneness with all other men. To him who has made that supreme discovery, all else shall be added. Knowledge alone will lead man to that supreme discovery. It is the office and responsibility of science to illumine the way for all men who are seeking the kingdom of heaven. And now I'm coming to a chart that he wrote that shows the color spectrum. And now the epilogue by Leo Russell. All men will come to me in due time, but theirs is the agony of awaiting. All down the ages, suffering man has lifted up his voice unto his God, saying, Lead us out of the dark of our iniquities and into the light of thy kingdom. And God has answered man's prayers through inspired messengers who brought new knowledge of the light of love and the brotherhood of man into the world for the renewing of man's mind with the power of new knowing. But man did not hear God's voice through his messengers, for man was still new in his primate days of little comprehension. Man crucified God's messengers and again suffered the fall of civilization after civilization by making every man fear every other man. And yet again, in our day, The agonies of 10 times 10 million suffering mothers of men are crying unto God to save the world from another plunge into long ages of darkness. For once again the human race is nearing another downfall into ages of darkness of its own making. For once again man has made a world of hate where every man fears every other man. Over and over again, man has climbed far into the heavens in his search for the peace and happiness which love of man for man alone can give to him. And over again he has fallen, because he has learned only to hate and fear and kill his fellow man for selfish greed, thinking thus by the power of might he will gain the riches of his seeking. Man has never known love as the very heartbeat of this universe, the motivating force behind all matter and motion, which controls the stars in their orbits and brings forth the fruits of the earth for man's sustenance. He has never known love as law, irrevocable law, not emotion or sentiment within man's free will right of giving and taking, but inviolate law, which brings an inescapable penalty to any man who violates that law in his relations with other men or with his own body. He has never known that love is balanced giving for re-giving, which nature obeys in all of its transactions. Man has always taken what he wants, not knowing that the hurt of such taking is his alone. Man has never known that love is balanced interchange between the pairs of opposites of this divided universe. Without balance in nature's transactions, the universe could not survive. Likewise, without balance in man's transactions, man cannot survive. There never has been balance in man's relations to man. Love has not yet entered the world or the consciousness of man. Man has never practiced the principle of universal brotherhood, which God's messengers gave to age after age of fearing man. There never has been a time in world history when man has not feared and hated his fellow man, and locked his doors and policed his streets because he feared his neighbor. Nor has there ever been a time when nations of men have not armed themselves in fear of other nations, nor killed when one nation wanted the possessions of other nations, or to enslave their peoples for greed of power and gold. There has never been a time in the blackest day of world history that the black hopelessness of today's world of fear and hate of one half of the world for the other half, and the growing degradation and lowering of the spiritual standards of the world. This disunited, fear-ridden, tax-burdened world of man's centuries of empire building, by conquest of the weak, by the strong, cannot survive. It is doomed to self-destruction unless at this 11th hour the lesson of love once again given to man in God's divine Illiad message is learned and heeded by the few among men to whom God will give new power to immunize the few from the harm of the many. Unless the few among the leaders of men will arise to the power of new knowing given in God's message of the Divine Illiad, the free world of man will disappear. The slave world will then appear as a foremath to unthinkable degradation of the whole human race. Where love is, there also is unity, harmony, and the peace of love's balance rhythms in a united world. Where hate is, there follows the degeneracy of disunity, as night follows the day. That is the lesson which unfolding man has still to learn, until he learns that simple lesson of power, which comes from giving of service to his fellow man, instead of taking from him against his will. His civilizations will disappear in their own man-made chaos, one after another, until he learns that lesson. After millions of years of taking by the power of his might, his 6,000 years out of the jungle have not been long enough for him to learn that lesson of power, which lies alone in the giving of love, nor has he yet learned that his destruction is of his own making through violation of the law of love. Man acquired no knowledge and but little comprehension during his slow unfolding through primate and pagan ages, for he was not ready for it. Consciousness of mind in him had not yet dawned. Through dense ignorance of God's ways, man has suffered the agonies caused by dense ignorance. Then came the dawn of consciousness in barbarian man, and his first suspicions of a God creator, who to him was a vengeful God of wrath, for whom he shed the blood of bullocks and even men upon sacrificial altars to appease his vengeful God of fear and wrath. God sent new knowledge and his message of love and the unity of man through illumined messengers after illumined messengers all through his early barbarian days, but man was still too new to comprehend, for he was not yet ready to comprehend a God of love nor his message of love. He still shed blood upon his sacrificial altars to appease his vengeful God of fear, and he still suffered the agonies of his little comprehension. Man is still barbarian, for man still kills man, and he still worships a wrathful God of fear, and man will forever suffer the agonies of his ignorance until mind awareness of the God of love awakens in him in its fullness, and man knows man as one brotherhood and begins to serve man instead of killing him. Man learns his lessons by deep suffering, for only at times of great suffering does he turn to God for light to illumine his path out of his dark pit of hopeless despair. Man of today has had a half-century of deep suffering, and many there are among men who have turned their faces to the high heavens and cried aloud to be saved from their agonies. Man of today is not so new. His comprehension is now great enough to understand God's ways as manifested in his one law of love. Man of today is ready for new knowledge, and God has given to those few who are able to comprehend it, the power of new knowing, to command the forces which order the movements of stars in their orbits, and the earth to bring forth its fruits. The knowledge of God's ways given to man for his new day will give the few among men mighty new power to control all men of earth through God's one law of love, until the seed of it will multiply over the face of the earth and bring with it the harmony and peace of its balanced rhythms. When mind consciousness dawns in man, God awareness likewise dawns in him, and he becomes illumined with full knowing of the oneness of mind of man and mind of God. When that day dawns for man, he has command over all the universe, for energy of mind in him created the universe, and knowledge of mind in him controls its energy. Fear then leaves him, for he knows he has dominion over all things. He can no longer be hurt by man, nor will he hurt man, but the power will be his to prevent man from hurting man by awakening consciousness in him to love, even though he may lose one more life to find it. God's one message of love, which he again sends to man for his new day, is written down in the Divine Illiad message in the following imperishable words of man's understanding.